How's it going, everybody? Coach Tickety here with a few new tips that you can implement into your gameplay right now. So regardless of whatever rank you're at, what heroes you play, or even what role you're queuing into, you shouldn't have any excuses that prevent you from learning from this advice and using it to improve your play. Valentine's season is upon us, but you'll never dazzle that special someone while you're still hard stuck in Overwatch competitive. So if you're trying to level up your game so you can impress that Valentine this year, you should head over to GameLeap.com. Over there you'll find hundreds of guides and more being added every single week, all designed to instantly help you rank up and take you from 0 to hero. And this month only, use the code on screen for a special discount, and with all those savings you can even buy a second membership for your favorite duo partner. So what are you waiting for? Click on the link below and start your GameLeap membership today. My first tip is simple. Look at your teammates. Even if they don't happen to be directly in front of you at the time, you should be looking around with your camera to check up on their positions. And you can even see their outlines through walls, so there's really no excuse to not keep up with their positions as you're setting up for a fight. You can then use that positional information to plan out your next engage. You should be looking for important things like where your tank is positioned so you know where the front line is, or where important sight lines lie for backline DPS or support members. And of course, you should always be keeping an eye out for the most aggressive members of your team so that you can engage with them. It could be a tank like Winston or Doomfist jumping into the fight, or maybe a DPS like Tracer or Genji setting up a big flank. Whatever the case, make sure we're not only zoned in on where our enemies are and who we're trying to shoot at, but also what our allies are doing around the map. Even in the middle of a chaotic team fight, checking in on your team can help you notice important cooldowns they're using, or maybe when their health bars are dipping too low, and give you an idea of when they're getting ready to back out of the fight. My next tip is to use the scoreboard. There is so much important information here that you definitely should not be ignoring throughout your games. The most obvious of which being simply what heroes you find yourself playing against. If you didn't know, after 15 seconds into a round, you can look at the scoreboard and see every single member of the enemy's composition. So if you're ever not sure what the enemy is running, if you haven't had enough time to scout out every hero of their team, a quick look at the scoreboard can relieve that stress and let you know exactly what you're going up against. But don't only use it at the start of a round. You should be checking the scoreboard after every single fight just to see if the enemy's making any hero swaps that you might have to adapt to. The next thing we should always take a look for on the scoreboard is the status of our teammates' ultimates. You can prioritize how important your ult usage will be for the upcoming fight. If yours is the only one available, it'll probably be pretty important, but if we've got 5 ultimates available, we can try being a little bit more patient so that we don't accidentally waste it in a fight that we've already won with other ults on the field. You should also be checking for and playing around specific ultimate combos. If you're trying to set up a big Dragon Blade play as Genji, it might be worth waiting for that Ana who's at 85% to her nano before you go for the combo. And the final thing you should always check the scoreboard for are important standout players. Anyone who's putting out a significant amount of damage or finding a boatload of kills during a fight is worth targeting in your games. If you find there are players standing head and shoulders above the rest of their peers on the scoreboard, it's worth putting more of your attention to them when you're going into the upcoming fights. If they're on the enemy team, try to shut them down, but if they're on your own team, try to play around them and help them find even more success. My next tip is to play for the high ground. You've probably heard something similar before, but I promise you it bears repeating. Every piece of high ground in the game offers a clear positional advantage to anyone they're fighting on the low ground. And if you happen to be playing a character without any vertical mobility, it does make taking high grounds harder, but it's no excuse to ignore them completely. Don't get lazy, plan your movement around those locations and take them when you need to. Even if you're playing characters that don't benefit directly from being on the high ground, say a tank like Reinhardt or maybe a DPS like Tracer, you're not going to get a lot done there, but I promise you it will benefit you and your team to clear that space away from any enemies and make it available to your teammates instead. So the next time there's an onslaught of enemy fire raining down on you from an oppressive high ground, don't try to ignore it. Take the time to deal with it, and then at least you can start a team fight on even ground. My next tip is to join the voice channels. You don't need to be a shot caller or even talk at all to benefit from this, but you don't want to miss out on what could have been with potentially strong communicative teammates. And trust me, I know there are plenty of reasons to not join voice or to find yourself leaving voice in the middle of a game, and if that happens, don't be afraid to mute or just report those problem players and get on with your day. This doesn't need to be something you lock yourself into, but you don't want to be cutting yourself off from any potential communication in your games either. But whether or not you've got people talking in voice, my next tip is to use the ping system whenever you can. If you weren't around during the days of Overwatch 1, I simply cannot tell you how big of an improvement this is to the game. There's so much strong contextual information that you can share with pings alone. You can ping out important enemies that might be taking flanks or a location your team might not be expecting so that your team is watching out for them. You can ping that you yourself are going in or falling back from any situation to give your team clear direction. You can also just ping your ultimate status or when you're knee healing to give your team a heads up that you might need support or that you're going in for a play. play. And on the other side of things, for supports, you can also just ping an ally that's below full HP to let them know that they need to come back into your sight lines in order to get healed. I'm sure all you support players know what I'm talking about. Whatever the case, the ping system is extremely useful and you shouldn't be ignoring it. Map it to a different button if it's hard to reach right now. Me personally, I use the side buttons on my mouse for pings, and then just start getting used to using them in your games, and before you know it, it'll become muscle memory. My next tip is to stop rushing in. Next time you're setting up for a fight, instead of trying to find an excuse to go in, try asking yourself why you shouldn't. Even if you're playing a very fast-paced hero with a lot of mobility, it doesn't mean that you need to go first in every situation. You will almost always find more value by waiting out important cooldowns that the enemy has, maybe even ultimates at some points, or waiting for them to push into a more vulnerable position or find themselves splitting up as a team so that you can isolate your targets. While there definitely are some reasons to go first and fast in Overwatch, like when you've got big ultimates to combo and you can just wipe a team fight that way, that's not the majority of situations you'll find yourself in. And that leads me to my next tip, which is to save your important cooldowns for opportune moments. Even when you're getting aggressive or trying to close out a kill, you want to make sure that every cooldown usage is necessary and finds its most value. A support like Ana is a perfect example of this concept. I can't tell you how many Ana players I've seen in my career that just simply throw their biotic grenade and their sleep darts from 50 miles away hoping to hit a target, and even if they do, it doesn't mean anything. The worst possible outcome from this situation is that after using these important cooldowns, we find ourselves in a vulnerable position where we could have used those same cooldowns to save our lives, and then we just get outplayed instead. But more commonly what's going to happen is simply these cooldowns will just find no value altogether and you'll be falling behind in a teamfight. These are cooldowns that potentially could have secured a kill later on, but since they were wasted, they get no value. If this sounds familiar to you, the best way to stop this from happening is just again to stop going first. Let an enemy commit their cooldowns first and then counter them when they're out of resources, or let an ally go first and use your cooldowns to support their play and maybe help them secure a kill. Moving on, my next tip is to plan out your ultimates. Let's face it, ultimates in Overwatch 2 are game-changing. These are the strongest abilities in the game and they take a long time to charge for a good reason. So whether you're trying to combo with an ally with your ultimate, or trying to punish an enemy's position, or maybe just trying to outplay an enemy counter ultimate, take some time to assess the situation, use that scoreboard like we were talking about, use communication and pings to help out your team follow up, and then go through with it. Don't just panic react with every ultimate you use. My next tip is to hold space aggressively. No matter what type of objective you're playing around or whatever specific map you find yourself on, you should always be trying to snowball an advantage after a winning fight by taking as much space available to you as possible. Of course, this doesn't always mean running straight to the enemy spawn doors and waiting there just to get picked off, but it does mean taking a forward position around any important high grounds, choke points, or corners to make it hard for the enemy to retake that space. There are so many advantages that you get from playing like this. The first one being, of course, just positional advantage. You might have an important high ground or be able to play around a choke point that gives you an advantage in the fight altogether. But in addition to that, you'll be able to get some early poke and scouting in so that you'll be able to see your enemies coming and maybe even poke out defensive resources before they get there. And because your team won the previous team fight, you'll be in control of the objective during all of this time, which means the longer it takes the enemies to retake this space, the more free progress you get on the payload or the Koth point or the push robot, whatever it is. An important note that many players forget when holding close though is that you should be willing to give up that space once the enemy commits major resources. If they start pushing you out with big cooldowns or maybe even ultimates, it's fine to give up that space. Again, they're just using these in a fight that isn't influencing the objective, so that when they eventually get to the objective, you'll probably be able to outpace them with more cooldowns or ultimates available. My next tip is to always be thinking about what comes next. This can of course be applied individually when thinking about how you're trying to outplay your opponents, but I'm talking more big picture here, more along the lines of what's going to happen in the next team fight. Overwatch is a very unique game. It's often compared to other first-person shooters or even some MOBAs, but compared to those, there's really no ongoing fighting like there is in Overwatch. There's no rounds where you reset with your team and buy new weapons like in TAC shooters like Counter-Strike or Valorant, and there's no buying items or lane management between fights like in MOBAs like League of Legends or Dota. There is only team fighting, so this means that any time spent not team fighting should be used to give yourself some kind of advantage in the upcoming team fight. There's usually some sort of position you can take to set up, or some scouting information you can gather, or even just planning with your team about how you want to approach as a 5-man squad going into the next situation. The other tips in this video should hopefully give you an idea of what kinds of things you should be thinking about between team fights, but more important than anything is to stop wasting time thinking about things that don't matter. Don't get caught up thinking about things that happened in the previous team fight or how you're disappointed in an ally's performance or anything like that. Keep your eyes focused on the road ahead. Learn from the past, but don't dwell on it. And remember what I said, there's no excuses for you to not be able to learn from this advice and not take it into your upcoming games to find more success. But what else have you learned on your Overwatch journey that's helped improve your game? Let us know down in the comments, and you might even help out a fellow viewer who's struggling themselves. Valentine's season is upon us, but you'll never dazzle that special someone while you're still hard stuck in Overwatch competitive. So if you're trying to level up your game so you can impress that Valentine this year, you should head over to GameLeap.com. Over there you'll find hundreds of guides and more being added every single week, all designed to instantly help you rank up and take you from 0 to hero. And this month only, use the code on screen for a special discount, and with all those savings you can even buy a second membership for your favorite duo partner. So what are you waiting for? Click on the link below and start your GameLeap membership today.